Years ago, I was the lead vocalist for a church's worship team. Together with other members of the band, we would pick the music that we thought would foster a spirit of community and reverence before God. We strove to make the singing part of worship an eclectic mix of the old, "Abide with me, how firm a foundation, great is thy faithfulness," and the new, "How great is our God, how he loves, behold our God." From time to time, we would get requests, and, unless there was some serious theological flaw, or I just couldn't figure out how to sing it, we would do our best to accommodate. Such requests were relatively rare, except during one particular month of the year, July. As the 4th approached, certain politically minded elders would ask us to lead the church in singing the national anthem, or the Battle Hymn of the Republic, or God Bless America, and every time we would turn them down. It wasn't that we hated America. Far from it. Our piano player and guitar player had both served in the military. The reason we didn't want to sing patriotic music at a Sunday morning worship service was twofold. We were there to lift up Jesus, not the United States of America, and our kingdom was Jesus' kingdom, which, he told Pontius Pilate, is not from here. Patriotic music has its place, but at least when I was a more seasoned Christian, I did not believe it was during a time when we had gathered to worship God. Over the course of time, it soon became clear that our views on worship were not the majority's, and toward the end of my time serving there, conservative politics began creeping in more and more. It was a time when the Tea Party was reaching the peak of its influence, and President Barack Obama was seen as an existential threat to not only America, but evangelicalism. At the time, I was very conservative, but I loathed the marrying of politics and worship, and despised even more the way some elders in the church willfully spread lies about Obama or Democrats in general. This lust for power at the price of witness worried me, and when serial fibber Louis Gohmert was invited to speak at the church on a weekday evening for a Tea Party event, I knew we were in trouble. That lust for power at the expense of witness is the subject of Tim Alberta's recent volume, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory: American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism, published by HarperCollins in 2023. Alberta, a staff writer for The Atlantic, and the author of American Carnage on the Front Lines of the Republican Civil War and the Rise of President Trump, published by HarperCollins in 2020, had experienced firsthand the vitriol of hardcore conservative Christians when at his father's funeral he was confronted by members of the church his father had pastored over critiques he had made of both Donald Trump and the ways in which evangelicals had not only cozied up to the billionaire philanderer, but gave him their enthusiastic support. One man questioned whether I was truly a Christian, writes Alberta. Another asked if I was still on the right side, all while Dad was in a box 100 feet away. The insensitivity on full display at Alberta's father's funeral is given a fuller context in the rest of The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. Whether it is talking with MAGA minister Robert Jeffress in Dallas, Texas, or attending conservative political conferences and interviewing attendees and organizers, the portrait Alberta paints is of an American Christianity so diseased by megalomania that the whole body has become sick. It has been a slow-growing illness that, in recent times, has seemingly reached a tipping point. It is hard to walk away from reading The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory and not think that at the root of it all lay Liberty University, and in particular its founder, Jerry Falwell Sr. The late Virginian preacher turned founder of Liberty is today best known for his attacks on the Teletubbies, a children's television program that Falwell claimed was promoting homosexuality.
Falwell's National Liberty magazine calls the purple Teletubby named Tinky Winky a gay role model damaging to the moral lives of children.
It is being perceived by the gay community out there as something good for them.
Falwell says he did not research the issue himself, but his magazine, with 295,000 subscribers, points to what it says is evidence that the creators of the series intend for Tinky Winky to be a gay role model have surfaced. He is purple, the gay pride color, and his antenna is shaped like a triangle, the gay pride symbol.
Our interest is in being sure that parents are aware of what their children are watching and are sitting down themselves.
Decades prior, Falwell had become one of the most consequential figures of the late 20th century, especially with the creation of the moral majority in 1979. As Alberta deftly explains, Falwell and his sycophants claimed that the impetus for the organization's creation was the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade in 1973. But such a portrait is, to quote our author, evidence of careful storytelling and masterful salesmanship, but it does not stand up to factual scrutiny. Alberta notes that Ed Dobson, a friend of Falwell's and a dean at Lynchburg Baptist College, the precursor to Liberty University, disputed the notion that abortion was one of the reasons for the moral majority's formation. In her masterful History of the United States, Jill Lepore points out that some pro-life Catholics, upon learning of Falwell's seemingly newfound position on abortion, expressed skepticism. In 1982, she writes, the founder of the American Life League sneered, "Falwell couldn't spell abortion 5 years ago." Regardless of how it came to be, the moral majority helped to influence the results of the 1980 election battle between incumbent Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, and Ronald Reagan, a Republican. Falwell not only stumped for Reagan during the Republican primaries, but he poured millions of dollars into advertisements, making Carter seem, as Alberta quotes him, a traitor to the South and no longer a Christian. His interjection into Americans' political landscape was a boon for Falwell. Both his church and his college saw attendance numbers go up, and Falwell himself raked in millions of dollars, purchasing a private plane and appearing on primetime news programs.
And should we be basing our choice on whether they stand on faith?
Well, I think that the ideal is that we would have a man or a woman of faith who also is right on the moral issues. But I've known men and women of faith who didn't have a clue regarding national security, didn't have a clue about how to deal with terrorism.
Falwell had placed his distinctive stamp on evangelicalism and consequently amassed a significant amount of power. The surge of conservatism fostered by Falwell has grown, and it can be felt acutely in today's political climate. Alberta demonstrates this both in his interviews with MAGA-leaning ministers and defectors. In Chapter 11, our author goes over his conversation with right-wing pastor Greg Locke.
I'll take this microphone and bust you in the mouth with it in the name of God, because we ain't playing your stupid Democrat games up in this church. You hear me? If you're going to play games, you might as well pull your shirt off and be a big boy and do it right now.
Despite the unhinged nature of so much of what Locke says, the picture Alberta paints of him is complicated. Somehow Locke comes across as much more mild than his sensational bombast from the pulpit would have you think. But while Alberta believes Locke to be a genuinely gifted preacher, he nevertheless expresses concern about how Global Vision, Locke's church, manufactures an environment conducive to extremism. Other interviews reveal that evangelicalism is hardly monolithic, and that while Locke embodies a distinct Trump-era phenomenon of predictability. Others demonstrate a more independent spirit. David French, discussed in Chapter 18, stood up against Trump early on and faced repercussions for it. He and his family received death threats and other personal attacks. Trolls photoshopped images of his youngest daughter, who'd been adopted from Ethiopia, inside a gas chamber. Trump, depicted in a Nazi SS uniform, was shown with his finger on the ignition button. But French did not relent, continuing his opposition to the MAGA movement, as well as appealing to Christians to stand up to such movements, especially within their congregations. What Alberta does well in The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory is to report on the MAGA movement within evangelicalism with the gravity it deserves. While the stupidity of many a Trump sycophant may seem amusing, it is also alarming. As I record this review, seated in Congress are members who believe the last election was stolen, have endorsed so-called 9/11 truthers, claimed some school shootings were false flag operations, and more. These officials vote on bills in ways that reflect their depravity and ignorance. Combating them is the only way to preserve American democracy in an age of demagoguery. American evangelicalism is at a turning point, and it remains to be seen whether it will succumb to the lust for power so many of its leaders have led them to, or if it will emerge a movement prophetic in its denunciation of those who have cozied up to the mighty. It was Jesus himself in the Gospel of Mark who, when overhearing his disciples debate who the greatest among them was, taught them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Perhaps there should be a new slogan: Make evangelicals Christian again.